And we should be live. Let me check, but we should be. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we are live. So, welcome everyone. Today we have Liran Tal. He is from Israel. Hi, Liran. Finally, let me introduce you. He is from Israel. He is a DevRel for Sneak. He's a full stack developer, containerization lover and expert. And of course, we talk about security, Docker, Node.js, a lot of stuff. I'm super happy to have him here. So, how are you, Liran? How's it going?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. This is we've anticipated and tried to schedule this one for quite some time. I'm so happy it worked out.
Yeah, and I forgot maybe one of the most important things. He has been a speaker at DockerCon 2021. I've seen him on live stream on my YouTube channel. I've also done some highlights where he speaks for 3 minutes. So it has been really a great talk. I followed the talk from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. here in Italy. So it's about 9 hours straight in front of the monitor. But yeah, so Liran, if you want to make some questions, of course, drop this in the comments. This is the best place. Maybe let's wait just a couple of minutes. So Liran, let's start. Maybe let's start with maybe a little bit about your story. I want a little bit of background because I think we've been interacting on Twitter for more than 1 year, maybe. Yeah, and we have tried to organize this interview for I think 6 months or something like that. So finally we had some problems, but yeah. Okay, so. Would you like to? What would you like to say about yourself? Because how did you become a developer is one of my favorite questions of this series. Someone starts from their childhood, like I was coding on the legs of my father. Someone says just I started coding 6 months ago. I took React courses. So maybe something in the middle of these two. Extreme version. But I'm really happy to have you here. I like this way of interaction. Yeah, Twitter can be a little bit time consuming sometimes. Yeah,
true. A lot gets lost in the context of 280 characters. So this is really great.
Perfect. Yeah, we usually talk about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, like now.
Yeah, we can skip it this time. How I got started, I guess. My dad was into coding back then. Wasn't mainframes, but he was doing insurance related kind of work, and he actually introduced me to the whole kind of like the personal computer, the PC back then. He was coding in a it was a language that they basically kind of like macro-based language where they coded the whole kind of like operations that you could like tailor the experience and the whole insurance policy kind of stuff. So this is how I got started, and at a very young age, I think it was third grade or so at elementary school, just diving into. I think it was probably my first computer kind of like lesson back then. It felt very underground because I remember we were the computer lessons were like every week, and we were it was at a computer shop, and we were climbing up the stairs like the attic of that shop, and everything was messy and dusty. And but we were like a bunch of nerds in kind of like a garage kind of feeling. So this is how I got into computers, and my journey started with DOS, so basically MS-DOS and QBasic, and I think this is what pulled me in. I really was fascinated by the fact that we could, just by our brains or creativity, some knowledge, actually build things, create things out of nothing. I think that's kind of like the appeal that people get with development, the fact that you could build stuff. Yeah. This is me getting started with it, and I guess that has been my journey going into my I guess my teen years. running a bulletin board system, BBS. Do you remember those, Francesco? Did you log into those? Yeah.
Yeah, I think my very first, let's say, I don't know if we can call these computers, but I start with a Commodore 64. I don't know if you remember those. I still have one Commodore 64 in my garage. One day I'll make a video about that. Yeah, let's stay focused because still have. And then I start, with I think I was like 10 when I had our first personal computer. Yeah, it costed kind of a lot, I think, in the beginning. They were kind of expensive in the beginning.
For sure.
Yeah. And I still remember that I was the very first person of my classroom with internet connection. So I went to school like saying, we have some connection, and nobody understood me. So what is that?
Yeah. I remember us. We were kind of like, not fighting, but we're kind of like teasing each other on like who has the connection with the most speedy network. Was 2400 bauds, and then higher than that, and then the 13 and the 16 and the 56K. It was nice times back then.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just one question, then we get, of course, in the main topic. But do you like, for example, to build your own PC? Or have you ever built some with some pieces or not?
Yeah, I've done that a bit. I'd admit I'm not much of a hardware kind of guy. But yeah, I mean, I remember the days of modding the PC. So like buying all the LEDs, and then curating them into like this whole personal station on a tower, kind of like desktop computer.
Exactly.
I wasn't deep into it, but I remember those days.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so we can say that basically you love computers since the beginning. Let's say the beginning. Okay. Yeah. So now let's move a little. Some years later, maybe let's make a little jump. So, what about, for example, the process that brought you where you are here? You are currently at a DevRel at Snyk, right? And I've seen. I know this company, I think for a couple of years, I've heard about that because now they work with the Docker company. Is that right?
Correct. So there's a partnership.
The partnership, right. So can you talk about the process? Because I'm also interested into this DevRel job. So basically what you are doing, also what's the difference between a DevRel and a developer advocate. So yeah, I'll start about that and then we'll talk about security, of course.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the story with Snyk is rather interesting because it's kind of a closure for me, and I'll explain like why that is. Before joining Snyk, I was doing very much involved with web development around JavaScript and Node.js, and I have been through that scene for quite some time. And around 2016, I think, is where when I released kind of like this book on the essential Node.js security. And I did that because when we were doing Node.js back then with my team at HP Enterprise, this is a couple of employers before, we had those kind of like security tests where people would go ahead and we'll say like, let's do an audit, what are you using, let's find the best practices, make sure you're doing things right. And when we told them we were doing Node.js, it was, still pretty early around 2014 when we started that journey into Node.js, that, they did not have, the security team wasn't sure, like, hey, what should we do with, like, what are the security takes on Node.js? It was, very early. So I was starting to research that and, go into like, hey, yeah, what is it? What should we do? What are best practices? What are not? What are security vulnerabilities that are related to Node and so on? And so kind of like started curating my book. And at that time, I remember also, so this is that time being, 2016 or so, being kind of like familiar with Snyk. Snyk is, at that time also started with open source. So they were looking at open source dependencies, which I think today, like everyone, like have this awareness, developers have this awareness on, vulnerabilities that come in from the dependencies that you use. And that was, something that Snyk was doing back then. So even back at, HP, which is 2 employers before, Snyk, where I am now, I was actually using Snyk as an end user. So, from the user perspective, installing it, using it, working with that. And now doing a bit of a fast forward into, about 2.5 years ago when I joined Snyk, Simon Maple, the kind of like the former head of DevRel at Snyk, and an amazing guy, amazing individual who was, very much curating the spirit of what DevRel is about at Snyk as well. Kind of like pinged me on Twitter. This is actually, this is kind of like a hiring process starting on Twitter DM. So that's super funny. Kind of tweeted over and said, hey, what do you think about doing, developer relations, developer advocacy, kind of like full time for Snyk? And it caught me at a point where I think for a lot of people, I would say that, would be coming from previous positions that aren't DevRel, it's definitely a big change, right? Like at that time I was at, my previous employer was Nielsen, and at that company I was leading a team of developers. So my day-to-day was, code reviews, design reviews, all of those kind of things, engineering management and those sort of things. And, to imagine kind of like your day-to-day activities from doing, very technical discussions and reviews and, code-related hands-on activities to, I don't know, maybe writing blog posts or speaking, the entire day, kind of 24/7. It felt really odd. But I think Simon's request also landed for me at a really interesting point in time, where at that point where, this was 2018, I think. And when Simon reached out at that point, I was also, very well active in the community itself. So I was, regularly speaking at events. I was, writing, some stuff, doing some open source projects. At that point, I was also, I think, a year into the Node Foundation's ecosystem security working groups. I was doing a lot of like security for the Node.js projects and the ecosystem. Yeah, so like when Simon, kind of like reached out and said, hey, do you want to be a DevRel at Snyk? For me, it was, hey, I can do open source. I can focus on Node.js and JavaScript, and I can do security, which has been, security has been with me kind of like, throughout my teen years as well. So all of those kind of like, went into this, straight arrow for me that was like, hey, this is everything you kind of like doing as a hobby. Why not do it full time? And this is how I got into this position.
And I think maybe this is one of, I don't know if call this like the goal of a life. Maybe we have also other goals. But for example, because it's not that easy. It's not that you just wake up one day and you start working on open source, getting paid. It's a long process, I think. That it required also, I think, a lot of effort in the beginning, and try also, to collaborate, open source, being open-minded. I do a lot of Twitter spaces. I tweet constantly about this. Maybe I also a little bit annoying and boring, but I like this idea that you start giving something to the developer community, and then you give back. You take back basically. So I've seen, for example, I don't know if it was the first time that you spoken at a DockerCon. I'm not sure about that. It was the first time.
Yeah,
the first time. But you made really great. Yeah, it was like I'm asking this because you really look like an expert speaker. So take this as a compliment, of course.
A lot of practice.
So I have a question. How much do you think that doing all this public stuff, being involved in the developer community, helped you to get this offer? Because for what you said, if I'm not wrong, they reached you and they proposed this. In my opinion, it's a bit strange, to look for a DevRel position. So because this is also, for example, why I'm not looking for this actively, because it should be maybe a company like reaching at you and saying like, are you interested into that? Do you think this helped you a lot or not, a bit?
It's a good question. I think because I think there's like different views into it. And by the way, I think like both perspectives to it, like, whether this is proactively you searching for a DevRel position or someone reaching out are two very valid, ways of getting into this. And I could like explain and see like why that would happen, just because I was, chatting with friends about, who weren't doing DevRel, like, if they want to get into it, what's it like? And I think the fact, so like getting back to your question on like whether being active in a community, right? Like that is helpful. So I think it definitely is, right? Like the whole point, it really depends on, what kind of like role you are recruited to, but mostly that will be, very developer engaging and very developer facing, so that, your stakeholders are kind of like, for me, are the community, right? Like I have internal stakeholders as well at Sneak, but really the voice of users, developers is kind of like what we're trying to to voice internally and, understand the pains, understand the challenges, what could we do better? So if you're not in a community, that's kind of like, so how would you connect, right? This is kind of like the challenge of someone who's maybe looking to do DevRel, but not starting off from it. And again, I think it's not to a point where it's impossible or like you shouldn't do it, but for that, I think is a challenge that you probably need to kind of like overcome and see how you introduce yourself and be part of a community. But I think it's also worth at this point to say, being part of a community doesn't mean that you have, 100,000 followers on Twitter or something like that. This is not it. And if you go into, if you're not even a speaker, right? Maybe you just go to all the meetups of, node.js TLV that we have here in Israel, right? This is you being part of a community. You might be active in the local WhatsApp group, being helpful to users, local Facebook group, whatever that is. So I think all of those things would actually, I think, really just help you and maybe give you, maybe like a stage or maybe someone who'd be interested to, recruit you to be kind of like their face in that developer community that easily find you, right? If they're looking for someone active to engage with those developers, you'll be easily kind of like matched, if they need to source your, talent or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that it's not, as I said, it's not that you have to, it's not a must. You can be super successful even without using social media. You can take a job.
For sure.
Yeah. But of course, I can say this from my perspective. I met so many awesome developers, and you are one of them for sure. I'm not saying this because we are doing a live stream, but you can connect with people with the same interests. Like we are here now, we can talk about Docker even for 6 hours if you are available, if you want. But it's interesting because, of course, the connection on social media, if you use them in some way, they can really help you to get a job, to open up to new opportunities. Or just to meet friends. It's already something really great. But I've seen. What do you think about social media, Twitter? Do you use them a lot? I maybe I know the answer, but what about social media and in general? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way to connect with people, right? It's a way to for the lack of travel. And being able to just meet people kind of like face to face, or even virtually. We can talk about what that feels like, for doing speaking engagements and stuff like that. But social is a really good way to interact, and sometimes, by the way, it's a horrible way because if discussions kind of like take a bad taste of things, it's really easy to lose context, and people might be very short on writing on the keyword, and they want to just get the point out. And I can even feel that with some recent GitHub comments that I was kind of like working on an issue with some folks, and it's hard to convey the context.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, you can even get like bad comments even on GitHub now. we are not safe anymore. Not even on GitHub. But and for example, this is also one of the reasons why I like making these interviews. So the person in a different way. You create a little bit stronger connection because you can have even thousands of followers, but if you don't connect with them, it's a bit pointless. Let's say this. Yeah, maybe can help you maybe to get something, but this is not what I like to do. I like to be connected even one by one. maybe talk half an hour. I think these interviews helped me kind of a lot also to stay away from Twitter for at least now while we are talking. I'm not on Twitter, I as well. And but they can really be helpful, especially if you connect with people who do some kind of similar professions. So thank you, Liran. Would you like to talk about the title? Because I see, let's say that I've decided this title because I recognize you as an expert in security. And of course you are, because you just spoken at the DockerCon some days ago. It was amazing. I'll put the link somewhere here if you want to check his. But what can we say about security, about containers, whatever you want. If you want to also make a little bit introduction, of course, I'll leave you talk for a couple of minutes, of course. Then we'll go back on more informal stuff. Thank you.
Sure. So I think in general, like this, so for myself, right, this, what am I doing at Snyk? What am I doing at, with my life right now? This is very much, I think, dedicating myself to a mission where, I want to help developers build securely, right? This is right now, what I'm all about. And I love that, not because this is something that like Snyk put out and said, hey, let's do that, but because this is something that I've been fascinated with, with security and web security. And like, I've been following DEF CON since I was, 16 years old. So this whole kind of security, I'd say, security scene, or, the cyberpunk kind of days of things. This has been following me since, when I was a teenager. So I'm definitely feeling here a lot of, self-commitment and accomplishment in doing this and working with developers who, I've been on those, in their shoes, in those positions, before. And, whether Snyk starts with doing, open source security, or doing static code analysis, which, has been recently launched, or container security, right? All of those aspects, developers are, tasked with these responsibilities, right? You write code, it needs to be performant, but it also needs to be secure, it needs to be readable and maintainable, but you do not want to be a developer that, gets the company hacked or anything like that. So what should you do? And I totally, get that you cannot be an expert on all of those things. This is really hard, and, it's very demanding. So I love that idea that Snyk has in those terms, that we are helping developers with kind of like advice on how to do things. So if you are, taking that to the container space, if you're scanning a Docker image and you find 100,000 whatever vulnerabilities in it, what are you going to do about it, right? This is kind of like, hey, what should I do? Move to a different image. Which image should I move to? There's like 4,000 tags of the node base image on Docker Hub. Which one is the right for you? And the way Snyk kind of like looked at it is, hey, we are going to empower developers to help them solve those fixes by actually recommending them what other safe images they could use. So if you're using node 10.2, which is vulnerable, if you do a Docker scan, it will actually show you the results that says that node 10.12 or something has less vulnerabilities because the runtime is now patched and there's like less vulnerabilities in the Docker image or whatever. So I don't see this I think title as kind of like the security expert or the security persona, but rather kind of me trying to put all the resources out there of how I can make developers successful and build in a secure way while not getting in their way. So if it's those 10 best practices to build Docker, secure images with Node, or secure coding conventions, or whatever I can come up with, these sessions, with you on DockerCon, all of those awareness kind of efforts, being active in the Node community or the JavaScript one, that is helpful for me to be helpful for other folks to to get the message out, to get the awareness for security issues out as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Liran. let me play the devil's advocate role now. Sorry, Liran, but I don't have time for security now. I can take this. I can take this later. How many times did you get this statement? And of course, I'm saying this because we are not in the same room now. Otherwise, I think you would have kicked me. So,
I totally get it. Yeah.
What can you say to me?
So I'll say that I was saying the same thing when I was doing that, right? When I was a developer, I was saying the same thing. How do you prioritize security over other things? And I think what has changed in the world, and I think that we're seeing it today even more than before, is that security in the past, right? I have a whole talk about this. Security in the past was built for security people. If you think about what is OWASP, which is probably, I would say, like the most popular security affiliated organization. OWASP is, for those who may not know it, I'll kind of like tell a bit. This is the Open Web Applications Security Project. It has existed for over 20 years. Volunteers all over the world have created this foundation that provides conferences, training, documentation, cheat sheets, tools. There's the OWASP Top 10, which some developers may have heard about, which is trying to say these are the top, security web risks that you should be aware of, and so on. So I totally get that, people may not have time to handle security issues. I get that concern, and this is it. You could say the same thing. I do not have any time to, write tests or write, performance-related improvements or whatever that is. And that is always those cross-cutting concerns that, usually get, shelved away over product-related backlog items, if so to say. And so the shift that has been happening in recent years has been that we have moved from tools and awareness and fixing security for security people to fixing security to developers. And I'll tell you why that is, because there has been a shift also in understanding that if you need to fix a security problem, for at least for application security related stuff, I'm not talking about networking or the edge or anything else, those AppSec related issues are mostly fixed, by the developers. So for example, if you were working at a company and they would give you a report, an external entity would have done, a security audit and gave you, hey, Francesco, we sent you a PDF, 500 findings of all security flows that you had. Still, they can't fix it for you. The security team wants you to fix it, wants to fix it themselves, but they can't. It's issues in the code and the libraries that you use in different areas that developers have the context to fix. They may not know like how to fix it and what's the proper way of fixing it. That's where kind of like the security expertise come in from the security people. But the key to fix the problems and remove the backlog of this security technical debt lies with developers. So, I think developers today, and probably have mostly been, we've just like underrated and underestimated them too, from that sense. They care about a quality product, right? They care about shipping something that, people use and not get frustrated about. And definitely people are having more of that awareness now to privacy and security concerns. And so developers want to build something, of high quality, and that means that it's also secure. And I'm seeing that a lot with maintainers, being very responsive to security vulnerabilities that we find, and the Snyk team kind of like works with them to find it and fix it and all of those things. And this is great to see. So I honestly don't think that developers don't care about security, but rather we need to make sure that they have as maybe the engineering managers and the product managers understanding that they have I would say the time to and the resources to prioritize those fixes over other things. And how do we do it in a very good way? We help them. If that's the container issue, we help them and say, move to a different image. And if you do a Docker scan, it will tell you which images to move to. If you're using open source packages, right? Before Snyk existed, no one did this before, right? Snyk, the whole thing I like about this is, Snyk kind of pioneered this idea of opening automated pull requests, which, we now see across, GitHub advisories and things like that. But actually Snyk did this 4 years ago. It opened pull requests to different, repositories if you imported projects. So basically it not only found the issues for you, it fixed them. And we're doing the same thing now with static code analysis and secure coding conventions in your IDE, where we'll scan something, we'll see that you've maybe used an insecure API from the node.js API or something else, and we'll tell you, hey, we found 3 other commits that in open source that fix this issue, and you can look at how others fixed it and apply it yourself. So I think that approach that is very kind of developer first security, which is the whole I think concept and mindset of Snyk, is what is changing the world. This is the movement that everyone has been driving towards, and very legitimately, right?
Yeah, thank you for making this simple. But I think that there is a lot of work behind what you are saying. So of course, behind there is a lot of job researchers. I can share something with you. We can talk about this if you want. Because, for example, I worked for the European Space Agency, and I've convinced them to use Node.js for a new whole big project. And they were kind of scared, let's say, because they say, oh, but Node.js is just an open source project. It could have a lot of security issues. You're laughing, but I had to fight for days in meetings, with a knife in my hand, in my teeth. But because I know personally also, but Colin, other people from from the Node.js maintenance group. So about to go specifically about Node.js, I ask this because I think you are one of the most knowledgeable people that I know about that. Do you know that Snyk can even be more useful for some open source project, or is the same, like for, let's say, Java or other maybe not open source maintained? I don't know if there is something for Java, but let's talk in general. So what do you say about security for open source project like Node.js is?
You mean for the runtime itself?
In general.
So it's a good point in terms of hey, let's look at the runtime itself, because Node.js as a runtime project has vulnerabilities as well. Some of them I demo from times to times in a speaking engagement or things like that, or like webinars, and I show the fact that it's not just the code you write or the dependencies you use, but how Node can be vulnerable, and things have security flaws, and those will end up getting found out. And again, it's this idea, which, by the way, relates much to containers. That is, it's not just a container security in terms of how did you build it on open source dependencies or the vulnerabilities in the libraries inside a container, like libc or whatever. It's the runtime itself that could be vulnerable, and we should pay more attention to that and follow those. So I think as a project, the Node the Node project has been very super responsive on dealing with security reports, and adhering to proper security disclosures and things like that. There's a lot of work behind the scenes with security that people may not see, because things have to be uncontained under a private disclosure. So do not make the data out, so people could take advantage of it and weaponize exploits against it. There's a ton of work being done by really skillful individuals on the Node projects on the TSC that are running kind of like white hat hackers, kind of like running researchers, the most famous of those, probably the weak npm credentials that exposed a lot of projects like React and Debug and Express that that researcher had actually gained access to on these modules. And this is the whole ecosystem. This is not even the Node.js project itself, but there's a ton of work that's being done there to both mitigate, fix, and ship those security fixes, by the way, the Docker images as well, on time to the community itself. So I would say in general about open source that yes, this I don't think we're going to have less open source in the world. If anything, that's going to grow and grow more. And so we're going to find more security vulnerabilities, and people are going to write more insecure code, which is kind of like it's unstoppable, right? That's gonna happen. Just like you have bugs in software, basically the vulnerabilities are security bugs, and that's bound to happen. we could talk about maybe comparing Node and the NPM ecosystem in general with other ecosystems like Java and other projects, which we have done in the past in some research, prior research on this. But what we basically find is, whether you look at Java or Go or Python or Node, you constantly see a growth of open source software as well as growth of vulnerabilities in those projects, which makes sense. More software, there's more software risk, and more people will look at it, security researchers, to find and expose those bugs.
Yeah, absolutely. Just let me share something with you, because I want to let them out, because I had someone who said to me, oh, if the project is open source, the hackers can read that, so they will find the exposure. I think that's the opposite. So what do you think about that, about security in general? It's true or not?
It's hard to compare closed source with open source, just because this is, from the security perspective, just because of the data that you'd need to collect on it, which is not always available from the closed source perspective. But what you're saying is, very much relating to Eric Raymond's take on open source, right? Back in 1999, in that article that he wrote on the Cathedral and the Bazaar, which basically tried to compare this kind of distributed Linux-based, how do we build a kernel by thousands of people all over the world, while Microsoft back then, the software giant, was competing with it with its own operating system, Windows, and doing it in a more structured environment. How does that work? And one of the I guess the everlasting statement that Eric made was with many eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, meaning basically, like you said, if people are, if the open source code is there and everyone can look at it, we will probably find it a lot faster. And it takes us, I'm using this actually as on a slide like this. I've been very excited this year on supply chain security, which I'll be happy to dive into, but maybe in a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but maybe before that, I'm giving in that kind of talk this this overview of saying, well, if that statement is correct, how come we only found 10 years later a security vulnerability in sudo that existed there for 11 years, right? Sudo, the Linux utility to do kind of privilege escalation to run commands as root or anyone else. And yet that always has been there, but we just found it 11 years or so later. So yes, open source is there, and it's great that people are looking at it and trying to find security issues. That said, closed source, I'm following a lot of security journalists on my feed, and I can tell you that if you try and follow those people as well, you'll see constant feeds of the F5 firewall having an RCE, Fortinet firewalls having RCEs, Cisco equipment having unauthenticated something. So a lot of equipment that is not open source is actually very closed source, and usually sometimes even used at critical infrastructure for networking and things like that. These also get security reports around them, so people actually are able to find us, and they are not clear from security vulnerabilities. So I'd say this is, if you think about security issues as bugs, you'll realize that the fact that you have many bugs, and you accept it, it's the same with security. You probably have many security bugs as well, and those are vulnerabilities waiting to happen and maybe compromise a system.
Yeah, thank you. I love what you say, and I think that also the process of securing your application, it's maybe something that maybe the earlier the better. Do you agree with this? Or maybe you can...
Yeah. No, for sure. I'm all for it. Earlier the better.
Yeah. Of course, you should have at least something working, but because I think if you delay too much, then you say, okay, let's just go and let's hope that nothing will go wrong. But this is basically like building a house, and let's say we don't have time to take the windows, just sell them, which could sound crazy, but that's it basically.
It is.
Yeah. I liked your analogies with the doors and windows. Can you make this
At
again?
DockerCon, yeah.
At DockerCon, yeah. So what has been your experience at DockerCon? So we can also talk about all the new stuff. So thank you, Liran.
Yeah. So I've been watching a couple of those sessions, and specifically talking about that analogy with security, if we want to kind of like bang on that drum, is the fact that it's like, how do you feel? I think that question was like, how do you feel? Like, what is more important, right? Like fixing this or fixing the other thing, having a secure runtime, or fixing your code, or fixing your, I don't know, like your dependencies, whatever that may be. The thing is, a hacker looking from the outside, they don't care about what you invested 90% of time fixing. They care about getting in. So that analogy, that I was giving there was, if you leave your house, right, you're hopefully lock the door, maybe, I don't know, hopefully. But what if you left the window a little bit open, and the window from the kitchen also like a little bit open? Would someone care like which window that you lock the door very, very good with like the two keys from the top and the bottom, and you have fingerprint, identifying whatever lock? No one cares. They will seek for the low-hanging fruit, for whatever easier way that they could get in, and that's it.
I think this is probably also what you will do if you forget your keys inside the house. Then you will go for the lowest security point. This is what I should do. Probably also you. I love this analogy.
Yep. So, I would, security is kind of rough with developers from the point of view of, me as a developer. I have to build the application and think about all the ways that it can completely, get destructed by a hacker outside. So I need to worry about everything to get right, while a hacker, looking from the outside, they just need to find one way in, whatever that is, one way in, one little mistake that you've made, and they're in, whatever that is. I don't know, an open source dependency, vulnerable runtime, something with the network equipment, the WAF is not working well, and the fuzzing doesn't work, whatever that is, that's it. So that's kind of like where security is hard, and you have to face this real world case.
Yeah, thank you, Liran. I have another question. What do you think is the thing that people maybe they could improve more about security? Let's talk about just one thing, because of course we could talk maybe for days about security with you if you have time, but I don't think so. So in your experience, what has been maybe the less secure thing that people are doing that maybe they could improve? What do you think is the thing that they could maybe take care maybe a little bit more, and it's not that hard, like it's not that much effort? So we are here also, of course, to have some people watching this video. So what do you think? And this is one of the things that you should really care about.
I think it's awareness, again, because if we try to say, it's your dependencies versus something else, we're not going to win that game, because we are prioritizing again, and we are sacrificing something else. Yeah. So, but if you think about the fact and saying, hey, let's make sure that awareness is something that's on everyone's top of mind, then that trickles down and it becomes a culture. So if you are working in a team and someone opens a pull request, and they introduce a new dependency just for something, I don't know, forms something for React, someone else on the team now has that culture and has that awareness for security. They might ask, hey, what if that dependency has vulnerabilities? Hey, what if that dependency is unmaintained? What if it has, I don't know, 5 downloads and, probably a very weak NPM credential so someone can hijack it? What do we do then? If it's a code pull request that someone is adding, there's another team member and someone can say, jump into that pull request review and say, hey, what are we sanitizing input? Where is that input coming from? So as long as you're making having that security culture of securing things, and you're building that out, and you have it as a developer, and your team has it, and the organization has it as a whole, I think that is really the winning kind of like DNA that you need to have to basically win security. Because at that point, security becomes not just something that's on the backlog and something that you just kind of like toggle and wave off after you're finished, but it's something that you realize that there's really table stakes here, and something can go wrong and really bad, and the organization could theoretically suffer from this, and everyone are involved in this and care about this. So I think the highest win you could have if you wanted to reach one thing is a security first culture, security by default culture kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you for this answer, because I think we don't really have maybe a precise answer to this. I think I'm thinking about to make some analogies, maybe more understandable for people maybe just getting started with security. Hi Ayush, by the way. It's like okay, if you need to go out for your house, even for half an hour, you should always lock your door. If someone is ringing, you should always ask who is that. So something like that. So basic, of course, it's basic security. Of course, nothing is secure. I think we can say this. If someone wants really, really to get into your application, of course, it's hard to protect. But we're talking about, decent level of security. It depends, of course, on how much money you get out of your application. There was like Litz, I can't remember the surname, on the DockerCon, who talked about it depends on the security level which needs your application. If it's just your site with just some static pages, it's something. If you're getting money, if it's a bank application, you need a whole new level of security. So I also liked your idea on security layers. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I was interested into that. I'm thinking about I'm a fan of fantasy castles, so I was thinking about the security levels. I don't know if you ever seen the Lord of the Rings, when there are the security levels and they keep coming back. So I was thinking about that. I was that in my mind. This could be used as an analogy. So what about the security layers of an application?
Right. So that's kind of like a common practice in security. It's the principle of security in depth, which means you should have as many security layers as possible, so that if one thing gets compromised, there's something else to kind of like maybe even that out. And I can speaking to maybe front end developers in a sense, I can give you what that would be. So let's say you're building front end application, and you may not be using the secure or the best practices APIs to maybe encode data correctly or sanitize it, or whatever way that you want to put data on the screen and draw it into a DOM node on to the browser. So let's say you're not really doing that. One way that you could mitigate this potential cross-site scripting XSS vulnerabilities is by using a CSP policy, right? This is a CSP is basically a content security policy that says, this kind of content is allowed from this and that sources in this and that way, and so on. And you could apply it to anything from iframes to fonts to, inline JavaScript, whatever. So in that way, that's why kind of like security people say, a CSP is not a valid way to stop XSS. There are best practices of how you should, handle potential cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. For example, encode all the data or sanitize it, if that's needed. But if you apply both XSS mitigations, like encoding data, like all the modern frameworks kind of like do by default. If you do that and you apply CSP and you apply some other things as well, then you lower the risk, so that, for example, let's say you did not properly use a practice that in some part of the application that encodes input correctly, and that application is now potentially vulnerable to XSS, then maybe the CSP will be that layer that will actually stop an XSS from being evaluated. So putting all of those layers as much as you can in depth over your app, and you could take that everything from your code to the open source dependencies, the runtime, the CSP security headers, everything else, all the mitigations that you can apply. That would be great to kind of like help you ensure that if the attack surface is could theoretically be large, and you will minimize it with having enough mitigations in place. I'll give a link for this one as well. Shout out to there's an OWASP called an OWASP doc on this that's called Proactive Security Controls, if I remember the name right. And it's not about security in depth, but it relates about what are the mitigations for each potential vulnerability. It's a very long document, but it's if someone is interested to kind of like dive into something very practical, that could be it.
Perfect. I think we will also put in the description at the end of this video. So if you're watching this and you're not live, you should get this link in the description. Hi Tab 9. Also very great colors. Perfect for my channel. Let me ask you something about security. And I think if you and here we go with the hat. Yeah, I was waiting for this, but yeah. Yeah, about security layers, I think, for example, if you are a company, if you have, of course, not just one application, but if you have maybe hundreds, I don't know, a lot of applications, do you think that you can use some maybe low security layers for all your application? This is doable. What do you think about this? Thinking about securing, the whole structure of, let's say, not just one application, because maybe we are thinking about like secure your node application, but usually a company is not just a node application. That's more like a side project of a developer. Usually you have some backends, a lot of microservices. So what about the security maybe of because you talked about layers. So usually I'm thinking about image layers for Docker, something like that. So about security layers of the architecture of your whole system, let's say this system, and of course great hat.
So it's an interesting question, because I think there's no clear answer on like what you should do, what are the common kind of like grounds to do that, because it really depends on the architecture, the context, what exactly are we discussing here. But I would say, like, of course, you need to have scalable security. So one thing, I don't know if people have been following on things like the state of DevOps reports from Puppet or things like that. But one thing that we have seen that for sure is happening is the more mature DevOps kind of like pipelines you have, or I don't want to say pipelines, but culture and as an organization, the more mature it is around the DevOps related capabilities, it is usually where we see correlation with having more mature security and better security. And it's the other way around. The fact that you have like a less mature DevOps perspectives right to it is where security is really hard to add. And it's not to talk about DevSecOps, but just like to think about it, like how do you scale an organization to basically have security guidelines across the different projects, right? Like you're saying, it's not just one app I'm using. There's like microservices, there's whole architecture. So there is different perspectives to it. One of them could be, for example, having a CI, like a CI template, which all the projects would trigger on a webhook, and it would go and run specific, security checks, whatever that would be. So you could, take that and apply it to all of the projects. You could have things like, for example, I think we have it at Sneakum, like, I don't remember if we're still using that, like in the engineering, where it's like templates for projects, but we had it at Nielsen before as well in my previous employer. And what we did was we had this skeleton project. So they were built with best practices already built in. Some of them were, very simple stuff, like, the same shared libraries or the same kind of like configuration. So someone getting in, it's not just, onboarding with a project. It's not just about, easily onboarding, but also maybe the secure and the best practices around how to build and manage that project, in production. So you could apply the same things for security. And that is, to do that, very well, that's where you need to have very mature kind of like team and engineering, where there are enough tests to, catch if there's, regression, or, there's a mature DevOps pipeline and CI pipelines where you could introduce those checks and apply them. So I could continue talking about maybe using shared infrastructure, like, for example, an API gateway that is, kind of like consolidating it. But like, I wouldn't, I'm not coming here with from the security persona, and I'm not going to say that you should have an API gateway just because you need to centralize security. I mean, that would be, I think, an incorrect approach from the engineering perspective. But there's different ways that you could kind of leverage shared and scalable security throughout an organization.
Yeah, thank you, Liran. Of course, here this interview is just meant to know each other. I'm looking for maybe do something maybe more in depth together. Maybe we need to think about that. Maybe let's not wait for other 6 months.
Maybe a
little bit earlier. It will be good, but let's see. Cool. I don't know if we can manage maybe to do this even before. But I would like just to ask just about a couple of more questions. Of course, if you have some questions for Liran about everything, you can just throw in the chat. And please remember to follow him, of course, on Twitter. He's a super knowledgeable person. I like how he talks about Docker security. He has a great article. I think it's already linked in the video, but we think we will add something more. But check it out. Liran, let's talk a little bit about the content creation part, because I've seen we talk about that blog article, maybe also your future plans. So what's your plan? Do you plan to create more content, and which kind of? Yeah, thank you.
Content, yes. So it's an interesting question, because I think it's not as well planned ahead, I think, as people might see it to be. For example, that Node best practices one that has been, I think, well received by the community, by OWASP adopting it and so on. And we've done a couple of live streams with Peter from Docker as well on this. And this has been an idea that I had. I think if I look back at my tweets from a year ago, I think we had this conversation with Peter where a year ago I was chatting about, hey, we're making so many mistakes, building images. Maybe I should my next thing, what I'm going to do in this weekend is I'm going to build this repository called, Node Docker best practices. So I did that. I opened the repository, and like every good, procrastinator, I did not touch it for, I think, a whole year later, right? I had the idea, but, no time to invest in this and whatever. And so kind of when we went back into working, more with container security and trying to relate that to developers, I was, thinking back on this idea that I had before, and I was trying to research, this, what do we teach developers about, Docker, image building and containerization? What do people, talk about? I was reading a lot of blog posts about this, and I was seeing that, many of them have, I don't want to say they're bad, right? They're not bad. No one intentionally puts bad content out there, and it's not a judgment call. But people are kind of sometimes focusing on the simple, hey, this container Docker file works, just build it. But as developers, and I'm even speaking here for myself, sometimes not sometimes. I usually, if something is easy for me to copy paste, I will do it, and I will get started very quickly with a docs or a Stack Overflow comment or something, because I can move faster with that. Without understanding maybe that building Docker files, building Docker images out of Docker files that have potential vulnerabilities. So this is how I got into, seeing that there are a lot of maybe, not really secure or, production grade kind of tutorials out there. And I think that is why this kind of blog post or cheat sheet was, very resonating and helpful to a lot of people. And I decided specifically that I wrote previously, a bunch of cheat sheets on, NPM security commands and, what you should worry about as a developer and, different kind of cheat sheets. But this one specifically is positioned in a different way. It's because these are Docker files. I did it as kind of a step-by-step, like a building block. So you start with the simple stuff. You understand why it's bad. And we kind of line by line in the Docker file, we replace it with the new thing that, this new directive that updates it to the correct and best practice. And through that, you actually learn about Docker files and what each of those directive means. And I think that has been a key way. And this is the first time that I've done it, after, this couple of years here doing content and other things, that kind of really, I really understood how much different approaches to writing content really matters and is helpful to individuals. So I like this about content. Future plans, I think we'll be doing more about secure coding conventions, just because I've been diving, much deeper into static code analysis with like the Sneak Code Launch and things like that. So basically, imagine you have an IDE buddy built into your IDE, and as you code, it tells you, hey, well, wait a second, I think you've just added here a command injection or an XSS from a source to a sink. And by the way, if you need to fix it, these are a few commits that we found that fix the issue. So I really love that approach, and that's what I've been kind of like diving deeper into, and trying to build some real world cases around it to give people the feeling of how it's like.
Yeah, but so this is it's I don't know if I get it right. Something like a VS Code extension.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay, I'll stay tuned for this. So if you have some news, send me a message, because sometimes Twitter is a mess. If you announce something, you can easily lose this. I usually lose this. By the way, hi Chris, you are late, and also hi Hadesh, because we have talked about for 1 hour now. I could really listen to you for hours, but so let me just say something, because I also try to teach containerization from the start, from the beginning. And sometimes maybe it would be great, for example, if you want, we could also do something together. Like maybe I think to explain containerization from zero, you need first of all teach the concepts of containerization. And of course, the earlier the better the security. Probably I will not just use some security for the very first example of a Docker file. Sorry for that, Liran. But this is my decision, because I like, for example, everyone to understand that. Maybe we could work on something together. Like, you need time to do that. So, for example, you need this is an example. This is the hello world. This is what you can do. And then you can add this, at least, I don't know, maybe just a couple of things, just to, as you say, to wake up the awareness of the developer. Like, say, what we are writing here is not production ready. We should maybe add a disclaimer, like maybe said.
Exactly.
Like something popping, like, of course, we are here to show you how you create if you don't know how to do this. Of course, this is not what should go in production. I totally agree with you. But sometimes, usually I do very super basic example, because people need to understand even the process of working, like even the process of building, I don't know, like building a house. And then, of course, you should talk about security. Yeah, if we can make this analogy, we can. But I think you need, a little bit of time, maybe a couple of demos. I'm working about like a series of demos with containerization from zero. Maybe I should put maybe security at some point. Like, of course, okay, now you know how to do this. Think about that. Link some article. Yeah, perfect.
So it's, I mean, Francesco, we can talk about just to mention the fact that, you have been sharing content on Twitter about Docker best practices. And I really like that visual that you had recently shared. That was amazing, because I think the fact that you colorize different things and kind of group them in different areas, it really helps to, people kind of learn visually or from reading or from videos, different ways. And that easily stands out and explains, how stuff is, how a Docker command is structured.
Yeah, thank you. This really made my day, because it took me 2 hours to make, because I'm really bad at design. I asked the help.
Oh my God, same here, buddy. Same here.
I asked the help to do this, but of course, this is also an example of how you can say something that maybe it's obvious for someone who has worked for containers for 4 years. I know that. But maybe for some, this is how I would have liked to see the content when I was just getting started. So this is why I'm doing this. I've done a couple of them. I also I think that I took some, let's say, inspiration from DockerCon in some ways, but because I like the contrast from white and black. But let's see. And also I ask, usually I send a message to Chris. Do you like this? Because he is my, I like to talk with him about
Sounding
that, because he loves Docker and also great at design. Yeah, we have Tabnan AI, at Light. So, so if you want, we are more than 1 hour. This is almost a record. So if you want to ask a question to Liran, drop this in the chat. Otherwise, yeah, Chris. Otherwise, Liran, if you want to just say something to hand this, I think this will be just our first collaboration because we have a lot of interest in common. Thank you, of course, for being here, for hanging out 1 hour or so. Maybe if we do something else, I would love to go a little bit more in depth about some technical stuff. We need to work about that. Let's keep in touch. But would you like to do some to maybe leave like a final message to someone who is watching this about security, containers, and about what you do? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, Francesco, first of all, then thanks for having me. I mean, this was something I was looking forward to for a long time, and so happy we're catching up. I'd love to for us to kind of like do more of this. I knew this was going to be a fun one, so I'm happy it worked out for us on timing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a whole kind of like message to the world, but I would say I love you, all developers out there in the world. You're all great individuals. We need to trust each other more, to give more kind of like the benefit of the doubt, the time to do things right. And I think there's a great kind of like future ahead of us for security and what it entails. Have fun building things, but do them securely. Do it with responsibility of like understanding what you're building. And I have this whole which I told you I'd get to, that supply chain security, which is, for me, it's a frightening topic because today it's an NPM package that does left padding of a string, and tomorrow it's an NPM package that powers my my heart kind of like device. So we should be a bit more worried about what's going on there with software, and it's great that we're having those conversations. This is definitely something that is the awareness part here is something that hasn't been happening enough, and I'm happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Liran. I see this as a starting point, of course, so we could talk about this maybe for days or weeks, I don't know, but let's keep in touch. Please follow him on Twitter. Do you use other socials or
just Twitter and GitHub, that's it.
Perfect. Follow him
it's
on
enough
Twitter
for me.
and GitHub. I'll put a link maybe in the future. So we're done. Thank you again. I'm so happy that finally we did this because it took some time to schedule this, but finally we did this. Bimashu, you were in the Twitter space yesterday, I think, with a different profile picture. So Liran, thank you again, and looking forward to doing something more technical maybe
Definitely.
next time. Let's keep in touch. Have a nice day. Good luck.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Francesco.
Bye, everyone.